Good evening. God bless the great state of Oklahoma. I'm very sorry not to be there with you tonight. I had intended to be there, but unfortunately Senate Democrats have blocked all amendments right now, shut down the process in the Senate. And so all of the members of the Senate are trapped in Washington, D.C., likely through the weekend. Trust me, I would much, much rather be with you. But I do want to take the chance to share with you a few words of optimism. All of us understand that our country's in crisis, but I want to tell you that America is waking up. Millions of people all over the country realize we can't keep doing what we're doing. You know, today, for the first time in history, a majority of Americans believe that our kids will have a worse life than we do. I think the central issue in the next election is going to be reigniting the promise of America. Getting back to that fundamental promise that our kids would have a better life than we did, and their kids would have a better life than they did. Now, how do we do that? How do we reignite the promise of America? First of all, we bring back jobs and growth and opportunity. We get back to an economy that is growing, where small businesses are prospering, and people are able to achieve the American dream. That comes from the private sector, but the men and women here understand cause and effect. Every time the federal government pursues out-of-control spending and taxes and regulation, the result is economic stagnation and misery and malaise. On the flip side, every time we pursue tax reform and regulatory reform, the result has been incredible economic growth. We saw that in the 1920s, we saw it in the 1960s, we saw it in the 1980s. Tax reform, reducing the burden that is strangling small businesses. I think the simplest and best tax reform is we need to adopt a simple flat tax where every American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we need to abolish the IRS. The second key is regulatory reform. Pulling back the army of locusts that have descended on small businesses, crushing jobs, reining in the EPA, which is out of control, and destroying jobs all over America. Unleashing our energy sector. You know, Texas and Oklahoma share a great deal in common. In fact, I think our two states agree on just about everything, well, except football. Energy is something that ties us together. You know, I grew up in the energy industry. When I was a kid, my parents were small business owners. They owned a seismic data processing company in the oil and gas industry. I've introduced in the United States Senate legislation, the American Energy Renaissance Act, the broadest, the most comprehensive, the most serious legislation to remove the federal barriers to developing our tremendous energy resources. To remove the barriers to make sure, number one, that the federal government cannot regulate or prohibit fracking. Number two, to build the Keystone Pipeline, to open up the barriers to building pipelines across our country. In addition, preventing the federal regulations that are standing in the way of new refineries. Eliminating the barriers that are closing off access to federal lands, access to federal waters, opening up new federal lands and waters to exploration, getting rid of the barriers that are strangling our coal industry, eliminating the ban on the export of crude oil, allowing us streamlining the export of liquid natural gas. Taking all of this to unleash the American energy renaissance, and in doing so, enable the private sector to continue creating millions of high-paying jobs. And I'll tell you the single most important regulatory reform. We need to repeal every word of Obamacare. We need to instead adopt common sense healthcare reform that empowers patients, that keeps federal government bureaucrats from getting in between us and our doctors. We need health insurance that is personal, portable, and affordable. The second key to reigniting the promise of America is we need to defend our constitutional rights. All of them. We need to defend the First Amendment, free speech, and especially religious liberty. I have been proud to spend over 2 decades fighting to defend religious liberty over and over and over again, and I will never, ever, ever shy from standing up and defending the religious liberty of every American. We need to defend the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. We need to defend the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, our rights to privacy, keeping the federal government out of the lives of law-abiding citizens. And we need to defend the 10th Amendment, and that means keeping the federal government out of areas that properly belong to the states, areas like education. And we need to repeal every word of Common Core. We need to defend the rule of law. We need to end President Obama's lawlessness, and we need to rescind President Obama's unconstitutional executive amnesty. If I'm elected president, the very first thing I intend to do in January 2017 is rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action that has been taken by President Obama. The third key to reigniting the promise of America is we need to restore American leadership in the world. For 6 years, we've seen the consequences of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. Leading from behind does not work. Instead of a president who boycotts Prime Minister Netanyahu, imagine America standing unapologetically alongside the nation of Israel. Imagine a commander-in-chief who stands and says, "We will defeat radical Islamic terrorism, and we will call it by its name." Imagine a president who makes clear, under no circumstances will we allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. That's how we turn things around. Now, many of you might be saying, how do we get that? How does that happen? Well, the only way to do it is if it comes from the people. The sad reality is there are an awful lot of politicians, including a lot of Republicans, who have no intention of repealing Obamacare, no intention of adopting a flat tax, no intention of repealing executive amnesty or abolishing the IRS. The way to get that done, I intend to make 2016 a referendum on repealing Obamacare and on abolishing the IRS. You know, I think the central question in 2016 in the Republican primary is going to come down to one word: trust. Every candidate is going to say he or she is conservative. Not a one of them. You will not hear a speaker this week who stands in front of you and says, "You know, I'm an establishment moderate. I don't really stand for much of anything." Everyone will say over and over again how conservative they are. Let me suggest a test that every one of us should apply to every candidate who stands in front of us. Think of the dozen biggest fights of the last couple of years. If you say you oppose Obamacare, show me when have you stood up and fought to stop it. If you say you oppose the debt and the debt ceiling that are bankrupting our kids and grandkids, show me when have you stood up and fought to stop it. If you say you oppose the president's unconstitutional executive amnesty, show me when you've stood up to fought to stop it. If you say you support the First Amendment, free speech, religious liberty, show me where you've stood up and fought. Where were you on Indiana? Where were you in Arkansas? If you say you support the Second Amendment, where were you when President Obama tried to pass his unconstitutional gun control? If you say you support the Fourth and Fifth Amendment and privacy, show me where you've stood and fought to protect our rights. If you say you support the 10th Amendment and you oppose Common Core, show me where you've stood and fought on those principles. If you say you stand for life and marriage, show me where you've stood. Show me where you've walked that walk. If you say you support our friend and ally, the nation of Israel, show me your record of standing and fighting alongside Israel over and over and over again. If you say you oppose radical Islamic terrorism, you oppose Iran getting nuclear weapons, show me where you've stood and led. You know, in my time in the Senate, I've really tried to do two things. Number one, tell the truth. And number two, do what I said I would do. And I got to tell you, the reaction we are seeing is incredible. It was 2 months ago that we launched our presidential campaign. The energy, the excitement has been breathtaking. You know, right after launching the campaign, Heidi and I took our daughters. We went barnstorming across Iowa, across New Hampshire, across South Carolina. Every place we went was standing room only. The local press reported that our crowds were larger, in many instances double the size of the other candidates in the race. The local reporters couldn't figure it out. In response to our candidacy, the New York Times explained, Cruz cannot win because the Washington elites despise him. You know what? I kind of thought that was the whole point of the campaign. If you want someone to go to Washington and fiddle around the edges, if you think things are going just great in Washington and we don't need real change, well, then I ain't your guy. But if you think Washington is fundamentally broken and corrupt, career politicians in both parties have stopped listening to the American people, if you want to bring power out of Washington and back to we the people, that's what our campaign is about. And let me tell you the kind of energy and excitement we're seeing. The New York Times said, we couldn't win because the Washington elites control the money. And so, yes, the grassroots might be with us, but the Washington elites would shut off the dollars. They'd all be with another candidate in this race. Well, we launched the campaign on March 23rd. We had 1 week to go in the first fundraising quarter. We set a goal. We wanted to raise $1 million in a week. Now, frankly, I thought that was a pretty audacious goal. I wasn't sure we could do it. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, we failed in that goal. Instead of raising $1 million in a week, we raised $1 million in 1 day. By the end of the week, we had raised over $4.3 million. That consisted of 51,000 contributions, people in all 50 states who went to tedcruz.org and contributed to support the campaign. Over 95% of the contributions at tedcruz.org were $100 or less. $4.3 million in the opening week is more than any Republican candidate in the opening week has raised in modern times. It's double what Mitt Romney raised in 2012. It's more than double what John McCain raised in 2008. The strength of this campaign are millions of courageous conservatives across this country who are tired of painting in pale pastels. Reagan was right. If we want to win in 2016, we need to paint in bold colors, not pale pastels. We need to bring back the millions of conservatives who stayed home in 2008, who stayed home in 2012. We need to bring people of faith back. And we've got to reassemble the old Reagan coalition. We've got to bring together conservatives and libertarians and evangelicals and young people and Hispanics and African Americans and women and Reagan Democrats. That's what we're seeing. That's who's coming together for this campaign. I'm honored and thrilled by the tremendous support we're seeing in Oklahoma and the support we're seeing across the country, men and women who recognize what we're doing doesn't make sense. We've got to change path. We've got to get back to the free market principles and to the constitutional liberties that made America great. Well, as I said, I'm sorry I'm not there with you today. I wish I could be with you, hug your neck, visit with you, listen to you. But in my place, y'all get to hear something better. Instead of me, you're going to get to hear from my dad, Pastor Rafael Cruz. My entire life, my dad has been my hero. My dad was born in Cuba. And as a teenager, he fought in the revolution there. He was imprisoned and tortured as a teenager in Cuba. My father fled Cuba in 1957. He came to America. He was 18. He couldn't speak English. He had just $100 in his underwear. His first job was washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And he worked full-time. He paid his way through school. He went on to start a small business in the oil and gas industry. Today, my dad's a pastor, living just outside of Dallas. My whole life, my father has been my hero. You're going to see why. But I'll tell you what I find most extraordinary about his story. How commonplace it is. Every one of us, we have a story just like his in our background. Whether it's us, our parents, or our great-great-grandparents, all of us, We are the children of those who risked everything for freedom. That is the fundamental DNA of what it means to be an American, to value liberty and opportunity above all else. And that's why I'm so optimistic. That's why I'm so confident. I am optimistic because of each and every one of you rising up as courageous conservatives, saying we will not give up on this great nation. When I was a kid, my dad used to say to me over and over again, when we lost our freedom in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. If we lose our freedom here, where do we go? That's why we're fighting today. There is no place to go. And together, as we rise up, we will not lose our freedom. Together, we will preserve this last best hope for mankind. I'm very proud to introduce my hero, my father, Pastor Rafael Cruz. God bless you.